My name is Bob Crossman. I'm a member of the Oregon-California Trails Association, as well as the Southern Trails chapter. I'm standing here in the middle of Arkansas, along the Arkansas River. We happen to know that this is the very place where the old military road crossed the Arkansas River. We're fortunate enough to have two maps, one from the 1820s, one from the 1870s, that shows the old military road coming down to the river, crossing on the ferry, and then going around Dardanelle Rock and headed on toward Fort Smith. In the 1820s, the trails in Arkansas were not much more than animal paths. And the federal government decided they needed a road, a passable road, from Little Rock on to Fort Gibson in Indian Territory. And so charges were made, a decision was made to build a military road 24 feet wide, 6-foot ditches on each side, 3 foot deep, brush and trees carried, leveled with the ground. And that military road came here to the Arkansas River, crossed here, and then headed on toward Fort Smith and then on to Fort Gibson. In 1858, the federal government decided it was time to improve mail delivery from the Mississippi civilization out to California. And so they contracted with a stageman named John Butterfield to carry the mail, the Overland mail, in 25 days or less from Memphis or St. Louis all the way to San Francisco. When John Butterfield looked at Arkansas, how to get from Memphis to Fort Smith, of course, the old military road was the obvious choice. And so it was here where the ferry crossed some 520 times, carrying the Butterfield Overland stage across the river to continue on the old military road. We are fortunate to have a first-person record of a passenger on the Butterfield stage being at this very spot. He was a correspondent for the San Francisco Evening Bulletin newspaper, and this is what he wrote on arriving at this place. He writes, "The only place of any slight importance bearing any semblance of a village was Dardanelle's." And that's where we're standing, Dardanelle, Arkansas. He writes, "which is nearly equidistant between Fort Smith and Des Arc, located on the Arkansas River. When we reached Dardanelle's, it was late at night and raining in an old-fashioned way worthy of an 1849 memory. We were most unceremoniously turned out of the coach by the driver and delivered into the charge of the ferryman, who took the mail bags on his shoulder, his lantern in hand, and told us to follow him to his boat at the ferry landing about a mile distant up the river. There was no remedy for this unexpected tramp, and so placing our blanket on our backs and valise in hand, the passengers proceeded to accompany the ferryman through a torrent of rain, up the riverbank and across the stream in his small boat. It was well for the coachman that he could not be found, because he would have been roughly handed for turning us over this way. We all got soaking wet by the time we reached the coach on the opposite bank. 3 of our party were considerably used up the next day from the effects of the drenching." What a story. Crossing this river in the middle of the night, in the dark, and a torrent of rain, being entrusted to a ferryman and his little ferry across this Arkansas River on their way toward Memphis in this occasion. John Butterfield, in planning for the Overland Mail, knew about the old military road, but he had an idea. What if he were to take advantage of this river? What if he could use steamboats to carry the mail across Arkansas instead of stagecoaches? He wrote about what a relief it would be for the passengers, having ridden from San Francisco for 19-20 days, bouncing around, packed together in a stagecoach. They could have a private cabin. They could have the luxury of a steamboat as they traveled from Fort Smith to Memphis. John Butterfield was so confident of this that in the summer of 1858 he purchased a steamboat called the Jenny Whipple. The problem was, in September of 1858, when it was time for this overland mail contract to begin, the Arkansas River didn't cooperate. The water was so low that no steamboat could make it on the river. And so John Butterfield had to hastily contract with John T. Chittister of the Chittister Stage Lines to carry the first overland mail. John Butterfield kept hoping that the rains would come, the water would rise, he could go back to the steamboat plan. But in that first year, while he subcontracted with John Chittister, on only 4 occasions was he able to use his original plan of the steamboat. And so John Butterfield gave up on the steamboat idea, and he purchased horses, he purchased stagecoaches, he stocked the route from Fort Smith to Memphis with his own material and personnel. And so after 12 months, he let go the contract with John T. Chittister, and John Butterfield himself had complete control of the line from Fort Smith to Memphis. This is quite a barrier today. But in 1858, the Arkansas River was shallow, it was narrow, filled with snags. There were seasons of the year when you could walk across, certainly ride your horse across. Here the water was unreliable, the bottom was not stable enough, and a ferry had to be in place to carry the overland mail across the river rather than simply fording. This is the story of the Butterfield Mail, encountering this river, finding a ferry across it so that it could carry the mail on schedule all the way from Memphis to San Francisco in less than 25 days. Ticket, $200 for passenger. Mail, only 10 cents. But the ride, it was not a pleasant ride. Crowded, 9 people on the stage. The front 2 seats sitting so close together, their knees were intertwined, bouncing, heads hitting the side of the stagecoach at night, trying to sleep. But they wanted to get to California. But there were also people in California ready to come home. The gold didn't materialize like they thought. And so there was actually a waiting list in California to get a ticket on the Butterfield stage. One man was going to have to wait weeks to get a ticket on the stage, and so he bought a ticket to ride on the back of the stagecoach, in the boot, standing on the boot, all the way from San Francisco to St. Louis, Missouri. Cannot imagine, cannot imagine. You might want to come to Dardanelle, visit this site, visit Potts Inn Station, just 9 miles down the road where the stagecoach stopped, and maybe even wet a line and see if you can catch a largemouth bass as well. Come visit Dardanelle, Arkansas.